Greetings everyone, this is Darren once again from the Gaming Pilgrimage, and it's been some time since the Fire Emblem Fates retrospective video. Today I want to do something a little different as I've been rather busy in my spare time, and I'm not satisfied where the other retrospective videos are currently at in production, so I'm going to be taking more time to work on those. But before the year is done, I really want to focus on some of the awesome releases that we've seen this year. And I want to do a series of videos, completely unscripted, much like the original Legends of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel review, and follow that up with various reviews, unscripted, completely off the handle, just me talking about various games that came out. And today, I really want to focus on Nier Automata, or Automata, as I've been told by many people that's how it's supposed to be said. Now, that isn't to say that I'm not going to be going back to those retrospective videos at all. I'll be going back to them at some point. Currently, I have plans to catch up the Tales of Retrospective and the Fire Emblem retrospectives, as there have been, new releases in those series, and I need to cover them. And then after that, we'll be going back to working on the Shin Megami Tensei retrospective. But, for right now, I really want to talk about Nier. Now, for those that don't know, I'm a big fan of the original Nier. It came out in 2008 and it was a big sleeper hit. It was something of a mess, with a bit of its graphics and gameplay being a little underwhelming, but overall it was a really creative and subversive title in a lot of ways, with a fantastic story and one of the strongest overall narratives for any RPG I've personally ever played. And that really caught my attention of the game's director, Yoko Taro, who is rather well known now thanks to Nier Automata. Saying Taro is infamous would be an understatement. The man is a complete enigma in the industry. He wears a giant skeleton face to basically every video and conference he's a part of, which is both awesome and insane, but he's also rather unique in his approach to games writing and narrative development, particularly with the Drakengard series and, of course, with Nier, which he's probably best known for at this point. As someone who's been a big fan of his previous works, I was really excited for Automata, especially with the announcement that Platinum Games would be developing it, as for those that don't know, Yoko Taro often has not necessarily all the budget he needs, or necessarily the greatest development teams in the world to work on his titles. Drakengard 3, one of his latest games, was a disaster in the gameplay department with a frame rate that was so unstable, you'd be lucky if you're hitting 30 at all. Now, with the announcement of Platinum Games, a studio that always prioritizes high frame rates and high fidelity gameplay, with someone like Yoko Taro, who is a genius story writer and subversive game director in general, I was really excited for this game. And Nier Automata had a demo that released later last year that got me really personally excited for the title. But I want to say that if you're having certain expectations of a Platinum game, or having previous expectations of Yoko Taro's other works, you may be a bit disappointed in Nier Automata, as it's not necessarily those things in a perfect combination. But what it is something I think is entirely worthwhile. So let's get into that. First off, the story. Nier Automata is set in a Earth thousands of years in the future, where humanity has retreated to the moon as aliens have invaded and used a variety of machine life forms to attack humans and take over the world. And now humanity is fighting back with the elite Yorha android squadron, which is a set of artificial humanoid androids that basically war for us with high strength and speed, and they've been fighting the war with the aliens for what seems like centuries or even longer. The core story of the game follows an android named 2B, who is rather well known at this point across the internet, and 9S, her scanner, her assistant in this manner. And these two characters are primarily going through a journey to discover what's going on with the aliens, how can we win the war, and how can we get humanity back on the Earth from the moon. And obviously, if you've ever played a Yoko Taro game, you know that everything is not as it seems. There's a lot going on. And I'm certainly not going to spoil that here, as Nier Automata's story is easily the most addictive and interesting part of the game, especially with how it handles really complex themes like existentialism. What does it mean for someone to think they're alive? And if they're not alive, how does that change them from a living being? Do machines have souls? It's a lot of sci-fi topics that you've likely seen tackled in other games and media, but handled in a very interesting and rather depressing way. That isn't to say there isn't any humor or charm to the story, as there's lots of that. There's a lot of cheesy quips going on between the characters, and there's a lot of goofy moments within the story that are really heartwarming. But ultimately, this is a Yoko Taro game, and as such, there's often a lot of tragedy there, and there certainly is in Nier Automata. But luckily, with such great storytelling and excellent voice acting, I was completely compelled the entire way through. And this game, like many other of Taro's works, feature multiple endings, many of which that build off one another and require you, the player, to see them in a subsequent order in order to fully appreciate the story and what's going on. However, unlike some of his other works, Nier Automata is definitely developed around this idea, as there's dozens and dozens of endings. And as such, you'll likely, by accident, access some of these endings, which are often bad ends, often very jokey in nature and aren't actual narrative developments, but they kind of give you some extra insight into the world, and they're actually pretty addictive to acquire. I ended up going through all the story routes in the game, I saw the whole thing through, and I got all the endings. I won't list how many here because I know some people find that as spoilers. However, I think something that some might find disappointing with Nier Automata is that you necessarily don't have all of the story ideas presented to you. Some of them are going to take further reflection and analysis to fully appreciate. I know with myself, just at a glance, not all the story and plot threads made full sense to me, but however, upon investigating through some of the pre-existing lore or finding notes in the world, you're able to connect a lot of dots that point together a really, really interesting and cohesive narrative experience. And I think the one thing Nier Automata does really well is it takes the direct interactions of the player and invests you in the plot by furthering how you're interacting with it. There's various story segments that are only really being pushed forward because you, the player, have a hand in how they're developing. And I find that Nier Automata is a very important game in how it handles that, especially with multiple endings and how players view progression. I know I've been talking a while about the story and how much I enjoyed it, and how it's definitely there to defy expectations. But overall, there is more to Nier Automata than just the story. There is also Platinum's quote-unquote amazing gameplay, and they are renowned for some of the best action titles of recent memory, like Bayonetta, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, Wonderful 101, and many others. Overall, the core combat is an absolute joy to play through. It is incredibly addictive. Your combo strings flow together very well between light and heavy attacks, and very much like the original Nier, you have a floating pod that replaces Vice in this instance and can fire various ammunition, it can do special attacks, and you can string all these together in very flashy and fun combos. It's not necessarily comparable to something like Bayonetta or Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance with dedicated combo strings, or necessarily the amount that you can access. It's a bit more simplified, as at its core, Nier Automata is an RPG, and as such, a lot of your stats will be dictating how fights go, and you can also change your stats wildly through the plugin system, which will require you to plug in various chips to your androids, and by doing so, you can greatly influence their stats, from having more HP, more defense, more movement speed, which is crazy, especially for traversing the environment, and as well, of course, increasing damage and adding other effects, like something that's akin to the witch time as seen in Bayonetta. Of course, being a Yoko Taro game, there is also a lot of bullet hell elements from a lot of shmups that you've likely seen in the trailers and in some gameplay segments you may have watched. And there is tons of that in the game. There's segments where you're flying around in your flight units and attacking enemies in various Gradius style formats, whether it's going to be using a twin stick shooter format or playing more like a side-scrolling shooter. And I often found these really enjoyable and incredibly interesting to see play through, especially with how the camera angles constantly change and you, the player, have to adjust your gameplay accordingly. And as well, it also makes for some very spectacular boss fights. And of course, everything is pushed forward in this game by the music. My god, the music in this game is out of this world. The original Nier is renowned for having one of the best video game soundtracks ever, and I would definitely agree with that, as the music is easily the best part of the original Nier. And here, I think they do an equally great job, and in some cases, an even better job of bringing that music to life, which really punctuates certain moments in the story. It really highlights when you complete a certain quest and suddenly a song transitions, and it really heightens the emotional highlights of that moment. If a story's meant to be sad that you're going through in a side quest, the music will come in at the perfect time to really punctuate on those emotions. And it's really refreshing to see that handled so well, as it makes going through the various side missions and main missions almost equally compelling, especially because some of the stories and the side stuff really comes together full circle, and even foreshadows events that will happen in the main story. But, you know, not everything is perfect in Nier Automata, especially if you're someone who wants to go for 100% completion like I did. I actually platinumed the game, which is something I seldom do these days. And doing so required a lot of grinding and fishing, which is something I'm not too crazy about in my RPGs. But having said that, there is a way to actually just buy the in-game trophies from a vendor. But if you're planning on doing everything legitimately like I did, you're going to be running around the open world a lot, as unlike the original Nier and unlike practically, to my knowledge, every Platinum game, Nier Automata is a fully open world where you can go from one environment to the next by simply just running around or hopping on an animal. And as such, especially in the early game, you're going to be running back and forth between different areas, trekking large distances. Luckily, your character's default movement speeds are incredibly fast, so you can get across the environment relatively quickly, but it doesn't really change the fact that you're going to be seeing a lot of the same environments quite often, and as part of that, you may be running into the same groups of enemies time and time again as you're doing side quests or you're trying to find certain items or materials needed to upgrade various weapons. But overall, I do think the gameplay holds itself together. And being a Platinum game, you're going to see a lot of high performance here. Frame rate was often very stable at 60 frames a second and seldom dipped for me. Granted, I was playing on a PS4 Pro. I can't speak for everyone else playing on the default PS4, but from what I've heard, it's relatively solid. So now that I've talked about a lot of the gameplay segments and the story and the music, I really want to touch on what a lot of people, especially if you're familiar with the original Nier, may be going into. If you're expecting a direct sequel to Nier, you won't be getting that. If you're expecting Bayonetta 3 or Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance 2, you are also not going to get that. Nier Automata is its own thing, and Yoko Taro has stated in various interviews that he never makes the same game twice, and that is especially true here. Nier Automata is its own beast and should be appreciated by its own values. If you're someone who's never touched the original Nier, that's perfectly fine. You'll likely fully appreciate this game without that. If you have played Nier or the Drakengard series, you're likely going to appreciate various nods and references, but you still won't have long-standing answers to various questions that have been present in the series for years at this point. Ultimately, Nier Automata is its own story, and it's a story that I think is arguably equally, if not more so compelling than what we've seen in Yoko Taro's previous works. So overall, I would say Nier Automata is an incredible experience and one that you should not miss out on, especially the flood of amazing titles we've seen in 2017. This is easily one of my top contenders for my personal Game of the Year list, and I would honestly say it's my favorite Yoko Taro game. And while on that matter, I would also say this is probably my favorite Platinum game, and it could easily be in my favorite games of all time. It's been an incredible experience, and it's so rare that I go the extra mile to do absolutely everything in a single game. But Nier Automata was one of those games. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed my ramblings on this game, and I hope maybe if you've listened to this and you haven't tried the game out, maybe you'll give the demo a spin, and let me know in the comments about what you feel about the game, if it's something that you appreciated, or if you thought maybe needed some work, and where you think it could have improved. Otherwise, I hope to be back soon with another video regarding some of the other fantastic releases that we've seen this year. As always, this has been Darren the Gaming Pilgrimage. Till next time.